Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 166. And this episode, we're putting on our headset mics, we're going on Xbox Live, and we are going to be saying things that cannot be printed on this podcast to everyone we play against, because we are doing a retrospective on the Xbox 360. And to help facilitate that, because I'll right off the bat say, I am going to be the weak link in the memories here. We are joined from Tales from the Backlog podcast, Dave Jackson. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you for having me back. I'm really excited to talk about the 360.
When we started first doing more consistently the console retrospectives, Dave in a DM said, if you ever do the 360, I'm in.
Oh, yeah. This was claimed from the word go. It was incredible.
Yeah, Matt and I are kind of constantly texting each other, just being like, hey, if you hypothetically do this topic in the future, hit me up.
Yeah.
This was one of them when I was like, oh, y'all do console retrospectives? Well, I have a console, so let's do it.
So we'll get into more of our histories with the console in a little bit, but this console did come out in North America on November 22nd, 2005, which it just doesn't feel like it's been almost 20 years. That's very weird to realize. It ages me. It had 3 different versions. It had the original white box. It had a more sleeker design with a built-in hard drive that was bigger. And then the right before, it had 3 refreshes, which is kind of uncommon for consoles. It had this sleeker, more box-shaped version that would be a precursor to the Xbox One. Mm-hmm. I would say right off the bat, one of the most famous things about the Xbox 360 and probably why there were so many refreshes is because this is one of the first consoles, probably in the history of video game consoles, I think, to publicly make it to market and fail consistently to the point where they were replacing them, and it had a whole term around it called the Red Ring of Death, when the front of the console would light up with 4 green rings. If you've ever seen Game Theory, actually, their 4-ring symbol.
It's one ring. It's 4 lights.
Right, 4 lights. It's based on the Xbox symbol. What would happen is if the console failed for any reason, permanently died, you would get this red ring of death that was 3 of the 4 sections of the ring lit up and red, and became so constant that they were replacing consoles for free, and they did a refresh probably sooner than they wanted to because they needed to fix the system because it was just failing all the time.
I believe it was reported at a $1.5 billion cost over time to fix and replace these systems. And there were a lot of theories at the time about it, but I believe there was a recent documentary that folks that were involved in that, folks that worked for Microsoft, it was finally a matter of, a lot of folks believed it was because of the cooling system, which was a little insufficient for the original model console. It was, but not in the way that people thought. It was quick temperature changes in the system caused general hardware failure, connectors coming undone and thermal paste being ruined. And that is what would be going on there. So it wasn't as simple as that one got loose, plug that back in. It's pretty hardy from what I could tell in my research.
Yeah, and pretty widespread too. It happened to me with my original release 360, and I bet if you got 50 people in a room that had the original 360, probably 40 of them had this happen to them. It happened to almost everyone I've talked to about the 360. Some people multiple times. So the legend of the Red Ring of Death has persisted to this day for a reason.
Yeah, I had one that failed as well. Before we get too far into the history of the console, let's talk about our start with the console. I think I've told this story already. If not on this show, then for sure on Reignite, because it is Mass Effect related. So I was not an Xbox person when the original Xbox came out. My friend Brian had one. We played Halo all the time. I told some great Halo stories on this podcast. But it was a console that I went to Brian's house to play, right? I didn't play a lot of shooters. That's what I knew the console for. And so I had no interest when the 360 was announced. Shortly after its release, I don't remember how much longer, but a fair amount into its cycle, I think, I go over to my friend Andrew's house because he's obsessed with this game studio called BioWare, which I have no familiarity with. And he is so stoked because this third-person shooter RPG called Mass Effect just came out, and he's like, it's the best game I've ever played. You have to play it. And so I come over, and he's like, please just play it. I'll hang out. So it's me, Andrew, and my previously mentioned friend Brian just hanging out. He's like, just make a character. I know you like character creators. Just make a character, and you'll see. Star Wipe later, Star Wars style. It's like 5 a.m. It's been like 6 or 7 hours, and I'm just playing this game. And Andrew's like, all right, Matt, you got to go home. Like, I'm glad you're enjoying the game, but we're done. You got to go home. I got to go to work.
And did you bite him?
And so I was like, wow, this was a really great game. And then shortly after that, or around that time, also Rock Band had come out, and I had been obsessed with Guitar Hero. And I was like, okay, I really like this game. Do I really like this game enough that I need to buy a whole console for it? And I decided within a short, 2 or 3 weeks later, that it was, and I did, and then I bought a 360, literally just for Mass Effect and Rock Band, and then of course I bought tons of games after that, but like, it was the stepping stone. I don't think I've ever had that experience again of a friend being like, oh, you got to try this thing, and I'm like, who cares? Like, imagine that alternate timeline where I didn't like Mass Effect, and how my life would have changed from there, the ripple effects.
All of our lives, honestly.
Yeah, it would change everyone's lives. And so then I had the 360. I, of course, got the Red Ring of Death. Then I got the black, like, kind of hourglass-shaped one, the second refresh.
The S
and
model,
had that.
I think.
Yeah, and I had the S model until I got rid of it. I had it for a long time. A friend actually eventually gave me, because you could transfer the data between them, he gave me his R2-D2 themed one because he didn't want it anymore, and it made the R2-D2 sound when you turned it on or off, which was neat.
So, quick side note.
Yeah.
This is the most I'm in my 30s ass comment I've made in a while. I have an Instant Pot that is from the Star Wars line. And, the 4-quart was BB-8, the 6-quart is R2-D2, the 8-quart is Chewbacca, that kind of thing. Mine is R2-D2 themed, and the fact that it makes beeps and things when you open and close it, as Instant Pots do, but that none of them are R2-D2
Yeah.
is one of the great constant annoyances and disappointments of my daily life. Because I use the thing all the time. It's incredible. It's life-changing. But I'm so hearing that the Xbox does.
Yeah.
See, you know what? They get it. They get it.
This was the era of a lot of like themed consoles, which still continues to this day, but I don't think to quite the same amount that it was in this era. From here, we will go to Dave and get Dave's origin story with the Xbox. So did you have the Xbox when it came out, Dave?
Either right when it came out or shortly after. So I had the original Xbox. We had all the Nintendo consoles, and then like we didn't have PlayStation stuff. We had the original Xbox. So on the original Xbox, I played hundreds of hours of Morrowind on there. That was like a formative game for me. When I was in high school, I would go to school, go to work, play Morrowind. And then in the summer, I would go to work and play Morrowind. That was basically my life.
Right.
So when I learned that Oblivion was coming out and it was not going to be on the Xbox, it was going to be on the Xbox 360, that was like, okay, well, I have to get an Xbox 360 because I have to play this game. Mm-hmm. So like I said, I don't remember if I bought it right when it came out, but it was very soon after because I remember having it and playing Oblivion basically as soon as I could, probably as soon as I had the money for it. And then one of the other big games early on that I remember like making a point to get because it was on the Xbox 360 and not on something else that somebody around me owned was Guitar Hero 2.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Xbox 360 version had extra songs on it, which the PlayStation version didn't. So I made sure to get it for the 360. Those are the two that I remember buying like really early on. And the Madden game, I think it was Madden 06 was the first one on the 360. I played a ton of Madden back then. Those were like the ones that kind of pushed me to get the new console as soon as I could. Like I said, probably as soon as I saved enough money from work to get it. And I had the Red Ring of Death not in the middle, probably like 2/3 of the way through a Fallout New Vegas playthrough.
Oh no.
Which if you played Fallout New Vegas, you know how many hours I probably lost because of that. And I've still never beaten that game to this day because of that. So there's my quick Red Ring of Death story. But then I got the black refresh model. When I moved to South Korea, I took 2 consoles with me. That was my carry-on bag because you can't put consoles in checked baggage. So my carry-on bag was literally my Wii U, my Xbox 360, all the cords and controllers, and I had some room for like a couple other things. But like that was my priority when I moved, was taking this with me.
Absolutely.
And I bought a voltage converter for it because they have different voltage in the plugs over there. And then I never played it. And I sold it when I was over there to someone who wanted to hack it. And I was like, okay, go ahead. And then just recently I bought a new one. I went to the retro store because I wanted to play Lost Odyssey.
Nice.
Famously not available anywhere else. So I was able to get the black refresh model again. So I'm back with the Xbox 360.
That's something we'll talk about in a bit, but there are a lot of games in this gen, the PS3, the Xbox 360, and the Wii, that are only on those consoles and not available anywhere else. But before we get into that, Geoff, what's your history with the Xbox 360?
It's a little different, honestly. The Xbox for me was a little bit of a somebody else's console.
Right.
For a long time. My house had an Xbox, but it was my brother's console in a way. Because I think he got it when he went to college. So it went to college with him. He would do, Halo with people, things like that. So when I would play it, it was usually some kind of multiplayer game. And it continued with the 360. Also that generation, the 360, the PS3, the Wii, I was not up to date on consoles. I was very much scrounging as far as games, getting things on sale, whatever else. And so when it was the newest thing, I didn't have it. I wasn't buying new things for it. So I would play other people's games. And I went to a music college. So if you think we weren't playing Guitar Hero and Rock Band, you are a damned fool. I probably put in the sort of hours on Rock Band that somebody who actually owns the damn thing would scoff at. But it's very funny, Dave, that you mentioned Morrowind and Oblivion because, again, I think of the Xbox as sort of like my brother's stuff. He put so many hours into Morrowind and Oblivion. And when Skyrim came out, I got it for him as a Christmas present. And within a month, he called me and went, "Do you hate me? Do you want my life to end? Because I can't do anything but play this game. Geoff, come on," kind of thing. But I got a 360 because a friend of mine who had a 360 and a PS3, he was so despondent that I'd never played the Mass Effect series and had no way of playing it that he went, okay, the only multi-platform game that I don't have on the PS3 that I need is the Ezio trilogy from Assassin's Creed. So if you get that for me, that is the cost of this Xbox 360 is yours now. So I did. And it is. And I started playing through Mass Effect, and I started kind of picking up games here and there because at that point, this was probably like 2011, something like that. So
towards the the back third of the life cycle.
Oh, absolutely. So things were on sale. Things were easier to get a hold of. Things were easier to grab. When my brother ended up getting rid of a bunch of his old video games, they came to me. So that's how I got my Xbox, and that's how I got a lot of extra games too. And so I ended up playing a lot of those games from that generation that, by that point, we were already getting into the new stuff. So I was playing catch up, and I knew that I would be. So I got to do a lot of catch up on that. I finally got to play Portal on there because I didn't have a gaming PC at the time. I had a Mac. So there was a lot of stuff where it was that kind of it's either on the 360 or it's on PC. So I was finally getting to do some of that catch up. I got to play Braid. I got to play Geometry Wars. I got to play through BioShock, Final Fantasy 13, and all of these others. And it's very funny now that I don't have a 360 anymore because I transferred all of that over to the PS3. But that's not to say that the 360 wasn't important and isn't worth talking about. I only have so much space.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dave is the only one on this call with a 360 in their home because I don't have mine either. Though I did recently at a thrift store find the entire Mass Effect trilogy on Xbox 360 for like $5 a pop. And so I just bought them all just to have them. But it's one of those things where I think back so fondly on the 360 because the 360 is the gen before I became what some people refer to as an insufferable video game nerd. Like, the podcast hadn't started yet. Before that, I was still kind of just gaming to play games. I wasn't following the newest stuff. I was getting games that I wanted, but like to me, the 360 is the last bastion, and this plays on something Dave was talking about, and Geoff, you also, of the replayable game. Like I replay games now, but definitely not as much as I used to. Definitely on a schedule or for capital C content. But back then, I wish I still had my 360, if only, and that original profile, because my current Xbox profile on like PC for PC Game Pass is a new profile. I lost access to my old one because I didn't have it anymore. But I'd be embarrassed at the amount of hours I put into either the Mass Effect trilogy or Rock Band or Skyrim. Skyrim was one of the last games I remember that when it came out, not only was it an event, but then I literally played nothing else for as far as I can remember. Like I might have gotten short, like 10-hour games and played in between and be like, that was great. Okay, back to Skyrim. Oblivion was a PC game for me and I played it and liked it, but I was like, okay, but I want this on a console. And then Skyrim came out on console and I was like, oh, I'm going to play this one.
Yeah, the 360 to me, there's a couple of like defining like pillars to the 360 experience for me, and Bethesda's one of them.
Yeah.
Whether you talk about Oblivion or Skyrim or Fallout 3 and then Fallout New Vegas, which Bethesda didn't make, but they're involved in it, of course, like 1,000 hours easily in just those 4 games on the Xbox 360 for me. That's a defining thing. You talk about your experience playing Skyrim. I got Skyrim at a midnight release until Tears of the Kingdom. It was the last midnight release that I went to. So like 10 plus years in between them for me. I played Skyrim so much when it first came out that it makes me physically ill to think about playing it again.
Correct.
Like I can't do it. So every now and then I'll think to myself like, it's been a while. Maybe I should like try Skyrim. I have a PC now. I can like mod it up and stuff. I never had that chance to do that on the 360. But then I get this like pit in my stomach that's like, is it my body telling me you can't go back there? No, you can't do it. That's how much I love those.
The physical object that holds the piece of your soul that you gave to Skyrim is crying out to you. Save yourself. Don't give it more power.
Exactly. To think that like we got 3 full Bethesda games on this generation, and then also Fallout New Vegas. Also published Dishonored, which is another one of my favorites from the console. And I bought Dishonored because it had the Bethesda logo on the cover. I didn't know that they didn't make it.
Yeah.
So like when I think of the 360, one of the things I think about is just how huge and in control Bethesda was, which was crazy.
And that they were new titles at the time versus the memes now of all the Skyrim re-releases.
Exactly. Yeah.
That console cycle is one of the longest console cycles, and it shows because we got several trilogies during it, including, of course, Mass Effect. Like Mass Effect 1 to 3 were all on the 360, which that just...
BioShock also.
Yep.
All of the Assassin's Creed.
Right. All of like the Ezio stuff. As far as I'm concerned, that's the only Assassin's Creed that
There was a trilogy within a trilogy.
Yeah.
And then we got Black Flag.
The dev cycles were shorter and the console life was longer, and it's just kind of mind-blowing to think about the amount of games that came out on this console. Also, this was like, I would say, the golden era of licensed games, not because they were all good, but with some of the worst licensed games in history, like the Thor game, the Captain America game. We also got some of the best licensed games ever made, like My White Whale, Wolverine Origins, which is literally available nowhere else but on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. And even though that movie is hot garbage, the game has Hugh Jackman voicing it, and it's one of the best Wolverine games to this day that I have ever played. And it's just not available anywhere.
One of the best licensed games from the 360 for me is the South Park, The Stick of Truth, which
absolutely
came out then. And I don't remember if the sequel also came out on the 360, but yeah, when you talk licensed games, that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah.
Well, for me, one that may completely distract us, one that is very premier in my mind is the Arkham series.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
The Arkham series has been released on a lot of platforms. It's had some wonderful re-releases and recollections, but to me, Batman Arkham Asylum is indelibly associated with the Xbox 360.
Agreed.
Anybody I knew who had it, who was talking about it, who was playing it, it was on the 360. When I played it for the first time, it was on that 360.
Yep.
Arkham City and Arkham Origins also came out on there, but like Arkham Asylum in particular.
Absolutely. So when I replayed the trilogy and played Origins for the first time, I think this is 2 years ago now, I played 1 and 2 on the Epic Game Store on PC because that's where I had them. Then I played Origins on Steam because it wasn't on Epic for some reason, but was still great. And then I have Arkham Knight on PS4 because that was like, I got a PS4 as a wedding gift, and the game I bought was Arkham Knight. Like, that's how excited I was for that.
Yeah.
But Arkham Asylum, yeah, absolutely, completely an Xbox 360 game. And moreover, like, as a lifelong Batman fan, felt like the first time they got licensed games right. Even though there have been other good licensed games, there was something about the love and care of Arkham Asylum Kevin Conroy, who is to this day one of the defining voices of Batman, and then Mark Hamill, and the two of them reuniting for the first time in a long time and playing such different versions of these characters, but still harken back to those older versions. It was just, there was nothing like it. And I think to this day, there's never, ever been anything like it. They've gotten close. I'd say that the Spider-Man games are pretty close to that, but I feel like I can say without a shadow of a doubt, they only exist on that scale because Arkham Asylum did what it did.
I think Insomniac would agree.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, now that I think about it, there are other licensed properties that owe a lot to the Arkham games.
Yeah.
Specifically thinking about combat systems, the Spider-Man games and the Lord of the Rings, like Shadow of Mordor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That all stems from that Arkham combat system. So I remember like being completely blown away by Arkham Asylum too, because the Batman games that I grew up with was like the one on the Game Gear or like one from Super Nintendo. And like, I didn't like any of those. They didn't feel like, in air quotes, you feel like Batman in the Arkham games. But yeah, I never felt that way in those side-scrolling beat 'em ups. But yeah, Arkham Asylum completely reinvented the way I thought about like superhero games. It was like that and the old Spider-Man 2 game from the Xbox.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
For sure. Well, yeah, it's funny because like we talk about Metroidvanias a lot on this podcast, Geoff and I, super fans. I know Dave is a big fan of Metroidvanias as well. It never occurred to me to so many years later that Arkham Asylum was also a Metroidvania. But of course, we're playing it a few years ago. I went, oh yeah, it's upgrade, new area, go back to an area, find a thing, find more things. There's something about creating during that era. I really thought during the Xbox 360 generation, we couldn't get better graphically. Game size, just all felt like the pinnacle. And of course, we continue to surpass it. I still look back so fondly on those games, and I don't feel like they've aged to me in the same way like a lot of PS2 and PS1 and Xbox games have, because I think there's this rose-colored goggle a little bit to it because it was just such a defining console for me. But I think also this era is when the video game industry became the video game industry. Like it started with the PlayStation and Xbox, but I feel like the PS2 to PS3, Xbox 360 era is like when those consoles really like became household names. You know, Xbox was still one of those, what's an Xbox? Oh, Halo? Okay, I guess. Also because the Xbox played DVDs and the PlayStation played Blu-rays, they were some of the cheapest ways to do that. It's kind of astonishing to me that they became such household names. Also, I feel like the Xbox was the arbiter of the casual game fan in a different way, right? I never say that word demeaningly, but like the sports game player, like Dave was mentioning, loving Madden, the first-person shooter player, the person who plays Call of Duty every year, and though I don't love that franchise, I get it. And the Xbox, I think, was really the starting point for like that becoming the thing, the norm. Is like, I bought an Xbox so I can play every Call of Duty and Madden, and that's it. And I made fun of those people, mostly because I worked in a GameStop and it was terrible at the time. But it really kind of is what made this console on the PS3 a success, for sure.
Well, the thing is, the PS3 and the Xbox 360 were the first HD-capable, out-of-the-box, HDMI cable, what have you, consoles. And I think that definitely carries with it a certain amount of like, now we are on the same level as film, as TV, as whatever else in terms of that. I mean, the Wii is the Wii, and always will be. And we have spoken about it before. And we will do a retrospective on the PS3 at some point in the future. But the 360 and the PS3, there's an interesting kind of shoulders of giants aspect about them. Of a lot of stuff is always like, oh, right, that came out, or oh, that was, or and then we think about it and go, oh, wait a minute. It's the Seinfeld concept of it was groundbreaking at the time, but you go back and you go, what was the big deal? I think some of that, certainly to your point, Matt, about those that were playing like other sports or first-person shooters or those sort of segmented gamer populations, is online.
Yeah.
The original Xbox had Xbox Live. It had an online service, but it was one of those kind of, we're rolling this out, we're giving it a try. It wasn't the first console to have an internet hookup, to have a modem to it, but it really was a fun, robust system. The Xbox 360 had it at launch. It not only had Xbox Live, but it had gamerscore. It had achievements, something that is the bane or boon of your gaming life, whatever it was. The PS3 took some time to roll in trophies, to the point where trophy support was something you had to check on the back of the box to make sure you could get it. From November 2005, You got your Xbox 360, you plugged it in, you could make your profile, you could get your trophies, your achievements on your games, you could have an online presence, and you can play games like sports games and shooters, which have a strong multiplayer component to them. You didn't have to have someone on the couch next to you. You could, but you could do it online. And that was a guarantee, as it were, provided you actually had some decent internet. But it wasn't the Xbox's fault.
Yeah. Just so listeners don't freak out, I'm going to go ahead and mention Halo now because no one said the word Halo yet. But when you talk about online multiplayer, like you have the Call of Duty, which I got into on the 360, but Halo 3 was like a giant deal when it came out. And I didn't personally play it, but multiple of my roommates at the time were all about it. So you had that. And going back to the graphics thing, I was thinking, and I think the jump from Xbox to Xbox 360 was the last time I saw the new console and thought, wow, we're in the future of video games now. Like the jump from PS3 to PS4 at the beginning didn't blow me away like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe it should have, but it didn't. And then the jump from PS4 to PS5 blew me away even less.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that graphics are where the huge innovations are being made in new consoles anymore.
It's more under the hood, yeah.
Yeah, but the difference between the original Xbox and the 360 was crazy at the time. And you, Geoff, like you said, you look back on it and you're like, everything's brown and gray and all of that from the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation.
Yeah, the textures are great, but they're mannequins.
Yeah, but at the time, like I said, I played Madden every single year. So the difference between Madden 05 on the Xbox and 06 on the 360 was a wild difference. Yeah. And it blew me away. And I think that's the last time it happened like that.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And I'm glad you brought up Halo because, like, you mentioned midnight releases earlier. And, like, this was the era of midnight releases for me. I went, we talked about in my Wii episode, I was at the midnight launch for the Wii and for Twilight Princess. Same for this. Halo 3, like, I didn't love Halo 1. I played it with my friends a lot. It was more fun to play multiplayer. But by the time Halo 2 came out and then Halo 3, I was in. I was deep in the Halo lore. I bought Halo Reach on day one, which to this day, in my opinion, is the best Halo game ever made, especially narratively. I was so deep in that world. It was why I was kind of bummed when Halo Infinite came out and kind of fizzled. I know there's still got a community of people playing, but, like, for me personally, it fizzled because I used to be a big Halo person. Halo is the reason I gave any first-person shooters a chance later on and why I can consider myself a fan of the genre even now. But it was games like that and then BioShock 1 and Infinite, because I didn't play 2 at the time. I played 2 much later. Those games with strong narratives, regardless of what we think the quality of those narratives are now, are why I played those kinds of games. But Dave's absolutely right. Those were the games that drove this console. There were tons of other great games, especially the first-party Xbox games. Gears of War, which you haven't mentioned yet, and Halo were the big ones. And Gears of War was another one. We got a full trilogy on one console, and that story, you can make fun of it, call it broy, and it is, but it had some of the coolest storytelling at the time that I just couldn't imagine at the time. You know, characters died, like important characters died. Everything felt hopeless. You know, it does a lot of dark things that later on we would get much darker and more real with on later generations, but it just felt unbelievable. Storytelling, I think, on the 360 was the first time we really saw stories that also competed with film and TV, like Geoff was mentioning. I mean, again, I promise this is probably maybe the last time I'll mention Mass Effect, but I think the reason I got so invested in that trilogy is because it was storytelling unlike I had ever seen before. I was playing Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
Absolutely the scope and size. And it felt real. It felt like the relationships felt real. We make fun of folks wanting to sleep with aliens, but the reality is the reason we love those relationships and those romances is because they felt so absolutely real and not like a video game character. You felt like you were talking to someone in the room. I don't really think we had that in the PS2 Xbox era, not on the same level for sure.
Kind of to Dave's point about seeing the jump from the previous console generation to the 360 and the graphics and the, oh my gosh, you know, we thought the PS2 and Xbox had incredible graphics, and they did. And we thought they were telling cool stories and had deep narratives, and they did. But you're right, the space, the expectation of not just voice acting and motion capture, but holding it to task, as it were, and letting it leap forward and evolve. Yes, for some people, wanting to sleep with aliens is actually kind of being more normal about things. But regardless, that's neither here nor there, nor tell on myself. I'm just thinking of people I've known over the years. Regardless, when that Xbox 360 entered my home and I started playing the Mass Effect trilogy, I started with the first game. The trilogy had been out. This wasn't like I was starting with the first one. Everybody had the sort of solidified opinions on things. And so enough folks were like, Geoff, you can start with 2. You don't have to play the first one. The gameplay's a little frustrating. You haven't gotten in the Mako yet. Like, dude, you can go to the second one. And as far as I was concerned, I'm like, no. A, I commit. And B, the story. Getting to witness the full spectrum of what was going on and making choices and seeing the consequences. Growing up playing games on the NES or the SNES, and you feel like, oh, but what if the game knows? Or what if it's keeping track of my choices? And it's not. The fact that Mass Effect was, and the fact that other games could and were. Nowadays, the smallest indie titles are the things that have the graphics of the NES and SNES and everything else, do keep track of your choices and do have that living, breathing world sort of feeling. But this was another one of those jumping points where it just felt like, oh, it can be everywhere now, and it's here. It was a real step into the future moment.
Yeah, I think the Mass Effect trilogy was the first time I ever played sequels that brought your save file and your choices forward into the next game.
Certainly on a console.
Right. I think there were PC games that did it before, maybe even some BioWare games that did it before, but never on a console, nothing that I'd ever experienced. So I was like you, Geoff. I played the Mass Effect trilogy when it was all out. After all the controversy with the end of Mass Effect 3,
right.
I waited until I think I went to the store maybe like 2012 or something, bought all 3 games for, $10 each and played through the whole trilogy in one sitting, basically.
Yes.
So also, you want to talk about dev cycles being shorter and the console living longer. How crazy is it that we got 3 Rockstar games on the Xbox 360?
Oh my gosh, right?
Yeah. Especially now.
GTA 4 and 5 and Red Dead Redemption all came out.
Yeah. It's so common now to just get one game per console cycle. And a lot of that is crunch and other things that are also not good. But because the 360 had been around so long, you could get all of these things. Like at the time, every Marvel movie had a game that tied in. Yeah. Most of them not good, but they still had them.
Phase 1 MCU was the last time we got that.
Right. Whereas now we're getting comic book games, again, that Arkham Asylum legacy, but they are not necessarily based on the films. They are trying to do something different in some cases. Right. And it just felt like at that time it was unlike anything else. I do want to go back to the live conversation because I think this was the first time I realized how big the console world was. And also, like Geoff mentioned, we haven't talked about the blades of the original Xbox interface and how everyone loved them. And then they changed it to the pages, which was fine. But you had, eventually you even had an avatar that was very much capitalizing on the Wii's Me a little bit. But it was so customizable and you were able to do so much on the platform. I don't remember thinking about the interface of a console before the 360. PS1 and PS2 had them, but it was pretty basic. The GameCube had it, but it wasn't until the Wii, PS3, and Xbox 360 era that we had interfaces and they mattered, what they looked like, how they evolved, how some of them have yet to evolve. But the 360 was an experience. It was a multimedia tool for the first time. And arguably Xbox is still chasing that ghost. But this was the first time it was this isn't just a video game system. It's an entertainment system.
Yeah.
Yes. It was the first time that anybody who spent a significant amount of time on the hub or on that interface wasn't a weirdo. I spent a bunch of time exploring the PS1 and PS2 interface, but I'm a weirdo. But making your avatar, customizing things. Weren't you able to unlock customizable pieces for your avatar from playing games?
Yes. They were tied to achievements and stuff, yeah.
That's incredible. I remember learning about Poker Night at the Inventory on Steam and how you could unlock things in that to go into other games. And the idea of the games you play showing up on your avatar on the 360. Look, I'm still... just talking about that, I get excited about it. Why can't we have that again?
This conversation reminds me of one of the other pillars of the 360 experience to me which is not the multiplayer gaming, but all the other things connected to gaming that are online, which could each be their own giant conversation. But buying digital games, the first time I ever did that was on a 360. Indie games, the first indie game I ever bought was on the 360. It was Bastion.
Nice.
And DLC, the first DLC I ever bought was on the 360. And like, obviously all of those are like core to the experience of playing video games now. At least I hope playing indie games is core to everyone's experience.
And if it's not, it should be.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. More indie games. But the other ones, I mean, DLC, buying digital games, like that all started here, at least for me. Like, I didn't have a Steam account. I don't know if Steam was a thing back in 2005. It probably was, but like this started on the 360 is where I'm going with this.
No, I agree. Absolutely. My first indie game, for the record, was an indie game that you can get a version of, but not this game, but Splosion Man, which was still to this day one of my favorite puzzle platformers. Splosion Man is on the Switch, thankfully, but the first game, the original game, is not. But that was the first indie game I ever bought. But like the Xbox Live Arcade specifically paved the way for online shops for the future. I bought so many games there, not even just indie games. Like I played Castlevania Symphony of the Night on PlayStation, but I beat Castlevania Symphony of the Night on the Xbox 360 on Xbox Live Arcade. Also, the Xbox Live Arcade and this online interface, we've danced around the achievement thing, but Xbox 360 started that. Steam brought them in, and then so did the PS3 and PS4 eventually. And boy, let me tell you, I could give a shit less about achievements now, but in the Xbox 360 era, when I had a gamer score and it was the console I was playing, I spent a stupid amount of time achievement hunting on the Xbox 360. And not only that, buying games that were easy to get the full gamer score on because I wanted to get my gamer score up. And this is not a thing I do anymore, but like I loved the Lego games, don't get me wrong, but 90% of the time I played them because I wanted the gamer score from them.
I don't think you're alone in that, Matt.
No.
Yeah. I mean, they have entire websites for helping people get that easy gamer score. The last game that I ever got every achievement in was on the Xbox 360, and it was Oblivion.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. The achievements are, they were a more motivating factor back then to go do extra stuff in a game. I still like getting an achievement or like having a trophy pop up on PlayStation, but I don't chase them.
No.
But I used to chase them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I live that life of if by the time I've made my way mostly through a game, I look at the trophies or the achievements that are still there and I go, does it feel sane for me to get the rest of them?
Yeah.
And you make the call from there. Like, yeah, there's plenty of games I've platinumed on the PlayStation ecosystem. And then there's a few like, playing the Final Fantasy X 10-2 remaster where it's fill the sphere grid for every character. No.
Yeah. I think the last games that I remember specifically 100%ing, and I could only do it in 2 of the 3 games, you guessed it, take a shot, it's Mass Effect 1 and 2. Because I don't play games on hard difficulty. I don't want to, but I played those games on Insanity. I save scummed to the best of my ability, and I got through both of them. And then when I got to 3, and like some of the challenges later in 3, I said, I can't do this. I can't get this one. But those 2 games I played on Insanity. I crawled my way through because I am not, as I've said many times, a very good aimer in shooting games, but I did it. And like now I couldn't even care less. I'm with Dave. Like when they pop up, they're fun. And especially when they have like fun names or they reference other games. Like I love that stuff. I think that's a blast. It's not quite the motivating factor it used to be. Also because I think now there are just too many games, period. And the 3 of us specifically on this call are playing too many games at any given time, but like if we were a kid now, 6 or 7, we have one console and we only get like 1 or 2 games every 3 or 4 months or even less, like then you're going to stretch those games out. Instead of replaying them, you're going to like, well, I can find this thing or I can do that thing. And like there's a ton of other things we haven't even touched on in regard to the online stuff, like the accessories for the 360. I feel like the 360 is in the core of this wacky peripheral era. I mean, also because it gets one of the wackiest peripherals, the Kinect, which I had and I tried to use. Like they really shoehorned it in, but I would use my hands to swipe through the menus. It felt like the Minority Report. Like I'm sure we all did that if we had a Kinect.
I tried it.
You had the keyboard attachment for the controller. You had the camera in the Kinect. this was the first console that came with a TV remote if you bought certain bundles. It had the steering wheels, the flight sim
the PS2
sticks.
had a remote.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It was either the first or just the first one that I had that was Wi-Fi capable.
Yes.
It had a Wi-Fi dongle,
Yes.
which was a huge deal because I did not always set up my console near the router.
Right. Yeah, totally.
And sometimes you couldn't.
Yeah. And that doesn't even mention the game-specific peripherals. We all talked about our love of rhythm games, and I had in this era so many guitars and drums and microphones. And then on top of it, so here's something, let's get into some embarrassing details of Matt's life. We're talking about downloading and DLC before.
Yep.
When I can tell you without batting an eye that between the DLC of Rock Band 1, 2, and 3, the specialty versions like Beatles, Green Day, whichever else, Lego Rock Band, all of these games that came out on the Xbox, the Guitar Heroes, I easily spent, I would say, $3,000 to $4,000 on stuff, whether it's DLC, new instruments, new games. There's no other game franchise I can say confidently that I spent, at least $3,000 to $4,000 on a lot of it. And that's probably still undercutting it because I bought the DLC every week. I followed the news cycle. Like, I didn't follow video game news cycles. I followed the Rock Band news cycle. And like when a local nerd rapper who I love, MC Frontalot, was getting a couple songs on Rock Band, I was like, this is awesome.
I mean, it was.
And it was, but like, and anyone who listens to the show knows I'm a big music nerd. Like, this was like the convergence of all of that. And I spent an embarrassing amount of money and time on that franchise and franchises like it. And I don't know that I can say that for anything else now. I mean, I've spent embarrassing amounts of money on video game related stuff since, but I think for one franchise specifically, I don't think I can chart it the same way because there were also just so many games during that cycle. Guitar Hero Metallica, Guitar Hero Van Halen. Like, there were just so many of them. It was the height of the rhythm game movement for sure at that time.
Certainly that phase of it. Yeah, no. And that's why I'm very glad that somebody else in my friend group was the one who had Rock Band. And when we were doing all of that, a couple of my friends all had a house off campus. And in one of them, the big bedroom, there was the drums and there was all of the guitars. And it was just a whole thing. And I'm really glad I got that enough out of my system that by the time the 360 entered my home, I didn't feel that itch. Because, yeah, Matt, $3,000 to $4,000 would have looked like a drop in the bucket for me. I would have found horrible ways.
We had it split between two friends' apartments. So my place was the Guitar Hero house, where we had all the Guitar Hero versions, so many guitars. And then the other house was the Rock Band house.
Smart.
In college, like, a lot of our Friday and Saturday nights we would go to the convenience store, we would get these knockoff Four Locos that were half the price of the regular Four Locos, and we would drink those and play Guitar Hero and Rock Band, and that's what we did for years. And we played Geometry Wars on the Xbox 360 also, which is still one of my favorites because of those memories playing together. But like, I don't think, and I'm glad we talked about it now in multiple parts of this conversation, I don't think you can tell the story of the Xbox 360 without talking about those music rhythm games, because they were a sensation that I don't think anyone who wasn't there could not really comprehend how fucking big those games were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, also for me, something I should talk about, because I think we did a rhythm games episode and I talked about it there, but I might as well recount it here in case folks haven't heard that episode. I even won a Rock Band contest during this time. So
nice.
I think it was Rock Band. You might have needed to put your band in Guitar Hero also. Maybe it was in Guitar Hero. You had to pick a name for your band, and I couldn't think of one. And so friend of the show, Joe Mastrapiro, who's done a Side Quest episode on Wild Arms, was with me, and I was like, I don't know what to call my band. And he's like, just call them Mega Boobs. And I was like, okay. And so my band for the entire time that I was playing any rhythm game was Mega Boobs with an exclamation point, capital M, capital B. Well, fast forward to, I don't know, towards the tail end of the Xbox 360 life cycle, and there was a bar in Brooklyn called Barcade, which was an arcade bar. It was fairly new at the time. They're pretty common now. And they were doing a Rock Band tournament. And me, my friend Andrew, my girlfriend at the time, Donna, and I believe Joe, and I think maybe my friend Brian was there too. Like a bunch of us we went to this bar. My friend Kristen was there too. And we're like, all right, well, let's enter. We like playing Rock Band. We'll give it a shot. Well, they asked me to sign us up. So guess what name we performed under? Of course, it was Mega Boobs, which, like, when the announcer, because they had an MC, like, running the show, when he had to announce our band for the first time, he went, okay, and their challenges are Mega Boobs. Like, was so dejected to have to say this name out loud. Anyway, we compete, and we get to the finals, and it's us and this other band, and this other band's been showing off the whole time, playing really hard metal songs. And so for the final round, if you failed the song, you were eliminated. We're like, well, we could go really hard and like pick a high difficulty song, high challenge, or we could pick a lower difficulty song but play it on a higher difficulty and still be impressive that way. And so we did that, and lo and behold, we ended up winning because we went with their strategy. They went for like not through the fire and the flames, but essentially something like that, and failed out, and we ended up winning. And the winning prize was a full Rock Band set for 360, in which then we got back to my friend Andrew's house and divvied up based on who had what. Like, our friend Joe didn't have a copy of the game, so he got the game and a microphone. Because I only had one guitar, I got one of the guitars. My friend, like, we just split it up amongst us, and it was just awesome. That memory is so tied to this console because, like you said, Dave, rhythm games had been around and continue to be around, but I think games like DDR and Samba de Amigo and a few others have continued on in a way that, like, we had Fuser for a few years, which I loved and was my harmonics as well, but didn't last. Like, I think since DDR, I think was the first of this wave, and then Rock Band was the natural follow-up to that wave of rhythm games. And I just don't think it'll ever hit that height again, not in the same way.
Like, I know Fortnite has their thing they're doing now because Epic bought harmonics or something like that. I just don't see all the Fortnite people going out and buying more plastic guitars at the rate that people were back in 2008, you know?
It's unsustainable.
Yeah. I think that, you know, the peripheral conversation, we do have to talk a little bit about the Kinect and why it was interesting. Maybe not good, but definitely interesting. If you're wondering why we're not going to talk about the Kinect games, it's because I don't know about anyone else on this call, but I had maybe 2 of them. Most of my Kinect interactions were based on what mainstream games incorporated it, but it was meant to be a competitor to the Wii, and I think the problem was they were starting from that point. It's clear that this tech was starting from that point. How do we compete with the Wii with motion control? And I will say that a lot of the party games, they worked, and they weren't awful, but like, as things got more third party and smaller studio, it worked reliably less and less. And I personally consider the Kinect a failure. I know the Xbox One had a version of it as well, but I just feel like this was a thing that they kept trying to push in the same way they're pushing PSVR now, I think, a little bit. Like, we can make this a success by making stuff for it. I don't know if it sold well. It definitely sold some consoles, but I feel like personally, as a person who loved the 360, it was not integral to my experience. It was kind of an add-on that I got because I felt some semblance of pressure to own.
I mean, I'll say that Adventures in Disneyland was really the one Kinect game that I spent any significant time on and had any significant fun with. So I suppose that's to your point. Most of the success I see in the Kinect nowadays is finding out how often Kinect cameras are used in medical imaging software and hardware.
I didn't have a Kinect. It was one of those things, I saw it, and from the second I saw it, I was like, that's dumb. I'm not buying that. I hated how much attention it got. Like, they really tried to push the Kinect out there, and it was one of those cases where, like, very quickly, I think a lot of people would look at it and be like, it's not happening. Like, spend your money elsewhere. And I think, to me, one of the biggest legacies of the Kinect is finding out that one of your favorite game developers was just moved into the Kinect mines. I grew up playing Rare games, and they had to stop making probably the games they wanted to make and just go work the Kinect mines for years. Now, like, what's the legacy of all that work? It's not much.
And on top of that, Rare now isn't known for any of that. They're known for their games before it, and they're known for Sea of Thieves now. Like, nobody looks back on those games fondly in the same way, at least. I'm sure there's someone's favorite, maybe, but like, they're definitely not by popular demand being asked to go back and make that kind of stuff.
To be fair, that is kind of a weird return to old form for Rare, because back in the NES days, they were very much a work-for-hire kind of studio. So, a bit of that, but I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. It's just something I'm noticing.
Yeah.
I think also you connected a little bit, no pun intended, the Kinect to like PSVR. And I think where the PSVR gets a little bit more of stable ground is Other platforms are doing VR like that, and it's kind
Right.
of a live or die as far as VR goes. The Kinect, if I'm not mistaken, was around the same time as the PlayStation Move.
Yeah.
So it was both of those consoles and those companies working with motion controls, each in their own way. PlayStation kind of making their own Wiimotes, and the Xbox going, nah, no controllers. Look at what we can do. And whether or not that was a success, I don't think it was. But it was built on that. It was aping that and pushing that. And even while Joy-Cons on the Switch do have motion controls to them, it's far less of a thing as it was in the Wii and even the Wii U. So I think that also shows chasing that was not the best plan. That idea of get gamers moving. No, not like that.
Yeah. I do want to say also, this is the era, and the 360 is, I think, the purveyor of it, of when wireless controllers became commonplace. It was the Wii also
Yes.
and the PS3, but like the Xbox 360 wireless controller has become almost the universal controller layout, and more importantly, has become, because Xbox is so close to PC, the universal PC gaming controller. I mean, I have an Xbox One controller for my PC for playing Steam games, and I think it just because it was USB based, it became ubiquitous with PC gaming in a way that, like, now you can absolutely use PS4 and PS5 controllers on PC as well. It's pretty easy to use them, but Xbox controllers continue from that gen on to be synonymous with PC and plug and play. And it's the first time I really remember going out of my way for wireless controllers, and more specifically, wireless controllers with batteries or battery packs, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we had the Wavebird, the greatest controller ever invented as well, but like there's something so kind of ubiquitous to Xbox 360 and wireless controller gaming, which is now just an afterthought. All controllers are wireless, right? There's no such thing as a wired controller anymore unless you plug in the charger wire. And I don't even know if the PS5 controllers work that way. I don't know if you could plug in a dead PS5 controller and use it. I think it only charges them. Don't quote me on that, but like for sure back then you could charge and play. They had a whole kit based on that, and it was kind of mind blowing at the time.
Yeah, the Xbox 360 controller also set the standard for the form factor of how video game controllers are now.
Yeah.
Like PlayStation's been evolving their own controller ever since then, but before this you had the original Xbox with the Duke controller.
Oh, yeah.
And the 360 controller came out, and I'm looking at the Switch Pro controller, which looks exactly
Basically
the same.
yeah.
And whatever the controller that comes with the series consoles, I have that. That's what I use for PC gaming. And it is almost identical to the Xbox 360. It's like they figured it out. And then Xbox and Nintendo were both like, okay, this is what people like in controllers. There's no evolution after this. It's just maybe, some functionality. PlayStation's really the only one that's still kind of putting their weird little track bar on the PS5 controller and stuff like that. But like when you think of a video game controller, or if you go look at like a stock image for a video game controller, it'll look like the 360 controller.
Yeah. It's funny. Nintendo kind of always skirts it by like, we'll put out our Wiimotes, we'll put out our gamepad, and then we'll also put out a pro version that's just the Xbox 360 controller.
Yeah.
And I think that's really funny. But even their controllers were kind of headed that direction. I mean, I think about the GameCube controller, and while it is not the same shape as an Xbox controller, it's headed in that direction already. Thinking of where the C-stick is and everything, it's like they're sort of skirting that. It's just really interesting to me that this kind of just became ubiquitously accepted, even to the point now where like third-party controllers, which aren't as big now as they were back then, all also mimicked that across the board. They followed that kind of form factor, kind of set the standard.
It is interesting that, even before I had an Xbox 360, if I wanted to do any PC gaming or online gaming or anything like that, I got a wired Mad Catz 360 shaped controller. And look, I am very much a dyed-in-the-wool PlayStation gamer. I prefer it generally, but I ain't gonna lie, it's comfortable. It's nice.
Yeah.
And it covers a lot of ground, which really, when you have the indie arcade, when you have the sort of biome environment, whatever, that certainly the 360 and things since have tried to cover in PC gaming and everything else, it covers a lot of use cases, which Nintendo controllers can do very cool things. They should be trying those very cool things. But having a wide coverage is useful. And I think that's also why we haven't seen a return to heavy peripheral usage. The 360 was definitely a system that tried to do, it feels limiting to saying everything to everyone, but it tried to cover a lot of use cases and it tried to cover a lot of markets and styles. And you know what? I think it succeeded very handily in that. However far or however long some of those things lasted is up in the air, but I think each in their own time and each in their own way, they succeeded.
Yeah, totally. I would agree. I think now's a good time to start talking about the games more in depth. But I will say there's no way we are going to cover every one of your favorite games, dear listener, because they were over 2,155 games on the Xbox 360. Something that I think we've kind of pivoted away from, although there's still an endless slew of games. So who knows, especially since the indie scene is bigger now.
Yeah, throw in digital games.
But this was the inception of digital games becoming common, indie games becoming common, especially with the Xbox Live Arcade. And so there's just such a slew of games. And so I think for us, we'll cover some of our favorites, but I really encourage the listeners to comment and respond, whether on social media or on the Discord, with your favorites, because we're never going to cover them all. I do want to start by saying we talked about Xbox Live games. There are some indie games that I have to mention here because these games still to this day continue to be some of my favorite games that I will buy on every platform after. And I think at the top of that list is a little game by a company called Behemoth called Castle Crashers.
Mm-hmm.
I love beat 'em up games. Been playing them since I was a kid. Streets of Rage is one of my favorite franchises of all time. Castle Crashers is one of the best to this day arcade beat 'em up games that has ever been made, from the customization, the characters, the different abilities, the type of villains, the replayability, the music, the design. It's 5 stars across the board. It's unbeatable. And I continue to revisit this game always. I have it on the PC. I have it on the Switch. Like, anywhere I can buy this game, I buy it. And I think while the Switch and Steam push indie games and support them, there's something about the Xbox Live era and the Xbox Live Arcade specifically that I think these games just got to push in a way that we just don't see anymore. They're trying now with Game Pass and stuff, and arguably they do that for some games. You know, I think Hi-Fi Rush to this day, though, had a lot of buzz. A lot of that came from how Xbox supported it. But back then, games like Castle Crashers, Alien Hominid, Braid, Explosion Man, Missplosion Man, I was looking forward to the releases of these indie games as much as I was AAA games. And I can't think of a time before that was the case. And I had to start with Castle Crashers because I love this stupid game. It's just the dumbest game. At the end of every stage, you would fight a boss. And then if you were playing with up to 4 knights or 4 characters, you would then fight against each other, and the winner got the princess. And everyone else died and then was magically alive in the next stage. It was, I think, also one of the first games I really took note of music. Like, I was a fan of video game music. I own the Chrono Trigger soundtrack. Like, I've been nerdy about that stuff. But I think the Xbox era is when I really started to have favorite soundtracks since those early 8 and 16-bit eras.
Yeah, speaking of Xbox Live Arcade, I mentioned it before, only in passing, but Bastion was the first indie game that I ever bought. And think of, Supergiant now are they're a super giant within the indie scene now. And yeah, that was horrible. I don't apologize, but it was horrible.
It was.
Don't.
Yeah. So Bastion, it was the first time, all the games I mentioned up until now with the Xbox 360 are all massive AAA things, like the Bethesda games and Madden and Rockstar and BioShock and Mass Effect and all of that. It was the first time when a friend was like, hey, this is it's a really small game. It's made by a handful of people. You buy it digitally. You can't go to the store and buy it. It's called Bastion. It has this great narrator and amazing music. And I was like, okay, whatever. I'll give it a shot if you leave me alone. And that was Aaron from Top 3, Matt.
Of course it was. I had a feeling.
So that opened the floodgates, I guess, is what I'll say, where it's you have all of these smaller things you can buy digital. It's arguably easier to get them. They're cheaper. It really opened the gates for stuff like that. Speaking of games, one of the other lasting legacies of the Xbox 360, as someone who loves Japanese RPGs, is that genre was not really a part of the Xbox 360.
Yeah.
Other than Final Fantasy 13, which I bought at release.
Yep, same.
Mm-hmm. Really, it's just there's a couple of games that their legacy survives because they were one of the handful of Japanese RPGs on the system. people talk about Blue Dragon now, especially it's coming up again now because Toriyama died, rest in peace. But that and Lost Odyssey were like notable because they were on the console, and I didn't have a PS3, so I missed all the stuff that went on that console. But then it was like, oh, the guy who created Final Fantasy, he's got these games on 360 now. And Lost Odyssey turned out to be one of my favorites. So like, whether we were just making a list of our favorite games or talking about the environment for the types of games you love on the 360, I love Japanese RPGs. And there's one from the Xbox 360 that I really love, and that's Lost Odyssey.
I think that what was unique about the Xbox is that it did focus in a lot of other places that weren't so siloed on other consoles. You know, I think about a lot of the open world games, especially. You know, we mentioned Grand Theft Auto, but even Crackdown and Crackdown 2, these games where you get to be like superheroes and just run all over the place was kind of astonishing. And like open world in a way that I didn't think we would ever be able to interact with an open world. Whereas now it's pretty commonplace between the Saints Row games and other things. That kind of fantasy is not that hard to find. But like, I think it's really interesting that, you know, RPGs, it was mostly dominated by Western RPGs. Like we mentioned a lot of them in passing, but like the reason I'm a Bethesda fan, like Dave, is because of the 360. Between Oblivion, which I'd played on PC, then Skyrim, which I played on the Xbox and put an embarrassing amount of time on, and then Fallout 3 and New Vegas, which I also had on the Xbox. Fallout New Vegas was the first Fallout game I ever beat. I abandoned 3, but I loved New Vegas to this day, arguably the best Fallout game ever made. And like, I just became obsessed with it because of that world they built. It was in Vegas, whatever else. And there was something about the world building, I think, on this console, and especially a lot of games on this console. Like I said, they were bigger than they had ever been before. And so we were able to have these kinds of worlds like we have in other games, but we don't have these games anymore.
Yeah. This was the explosion of open worlds and like people wanting open world games. You saw the Bethesda games, of course, the Assassin's Creed games set a standard for how open worlds are made that people are still following today, not just Ubisoft. Like I'm playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and it's got the DNA from Assassin's Creed from the Xbox 360 in there. So that's one of the lasting like legacies of, if you talk about design trends from the Xbox 360, like this is the explosion of open worlds. Not that like you couldn't make an open world on the previous consoles because Grand Theft Auto did, but maybe it was easier or the tracks had been laid down and those games sold really well. So more people took notice and started to make their own. You mentioned Crackdown. I remember Crackdown because it came with a demo for Halo 3.
It sure did.
And so people bought Crackdown because they wanted to play that demo. And then they played Crackdown and were like, oh, this game's actually really good too.
Yeah.
So double win there.
I mean, talking about trilogies that were like huge on the Xbox, Fable 1 on the original Xbox was pretty good, but Fable 2 and 3, like talking about RPGs and the limited RPGs that were on this console, Fable 2 and 3 to this day are some of my favorite games that I've ever played. I could not tell you when I ever played them last, probably on the 360. They're not really easily accessible now, but I loved those games so much because they made you feel like, in the Mass Effect way, you were creating your own world. You were building your own character. This character was you. And, you know, narratively, I think that they were probably weaker than I remember, but they were so huge. And it was like at that time, because Fable Anniversary was also on the 360, so technically the whole trilogy was there. This was the biggest RPG trilogy to be on an Xbox system, and now it's barely mentioned. We're getting a new Fable in theory in the next few years, but like between the 360 and now, there's been almost nothing. Peter Molyneux aside, there are a lot of reasons, but like it's wild to me to think about that game and then like, again, we talked about earlier, this is while there are tons of games here that are on PC, there are also so many games tied to this console that you cannot play anywhere else. Xbox has been pretty good about cloud gaming and giving access to the backlog now. And if you have a current gen Xbox, which I admittedly don't, you can play a lot of these old games. But for someone who doesn't own an Xbox anymore, there have not been ports or adjustments for a lot of these games. And I miss them because they were genre defying at the time, even though we've moved so much further past them at this point.
Yeah, I'd say so.
There's two other like huge games that I can't get out of this podcast without mentioning. The first one I didn't play back then, but I heard about and I've since played parts of it. And so I get it. now, which is the orange box.
Yeah.
Which was a huge deal. Like, again, I didn't play this back then. I played Portal for the first time a couple years ago. I played Half-Life 2 for the first time a couple years ago. But now I realize the compilation of Portal and Team Fortress 2 and Half-Life 2 and the episodes for Half-Life 2 all in one package, kind of bringing these staples of PC gaming onto the Xbox, onto the 360 is a huge deal. And like, just thinking about the level of quality, the amount of different experiences inside that one package, it's a nice little chapter from the Xbox 360. And I think it went to PS3 also.
It did eventually, yeah.
Yeah, that's a crazy release. And then Matt, you ready to ring the bell?
Yeah.
'Cause this is where I got my introduction to Dark Souls, was on the Xbox 360. I'm glad I did, because the PS3 had trouble running some areas of that game. But I didn't have a PS3, so I missed Demon's Souls. And I got Dark Souls at the store because the person at GameStop I think I told them I was looking for an RPG, and they were like, okay, try Dark Souls. And I was like, okay, sure. I don't know anything about it. But like, yada, yada, yada. Now I'm, on a lot of podcasts talking about From Software all the time. I'm a huge fan of what they're doing. And like, that's a huge part of my experience with the Xbox 360 is getting introduced to Dark Souls. And then Dark Souls 2 was also on the Xbox 360. So big thing for me there is those games.
Before we move on, I do want to say with the orange box, embarrassingly, so I got the orange box. People who listen to the podcast know I played Portal for the first time on PC many years later. I've still yet to play any Half-Life game. I bought the orange box so I could play Team Fortress 2 with all of my friends online. I loved Team Fortress 2, and literally I had that the entire life cycle that game was out for that console, and never touched those award-winning games. I only played Team Fortress 2. I have since, of course, played Portal and Portal 2. I love that franchise. I was on Jolachan's place talking about the Portal franchise, actually. I've still, to this day, never played a Half-Life game. I will, but I haven't yet. I'm sure they're great.
And it's funny, for me, Portal was the game.
Yeah.
That was, I remember seeing previews for that and trailers for it and going, this is incredible. This is going to be amazing. Oh my God. And the fact that like, it's going to be PC only. I have a Mac. Do I get an Xbox 360 to play Portal? I didn't buy a 360 to play Portal, but once I got a 360, I got it and played it, and it was incredible. So vindication there. But it's very funny how we all kind of come at it from different angles.
Yeah.
And the fact that they didn't charge any more than regular retail price for that collection.
It's astonishing. That collection now would be $70, and it would be insane. We'd still pay it, though.
$70 would be standard retail price these days. They charge $90.
That's true. Talking about Rockstar games, we also didn't even mention one of, I think, the biggest Rockstar games, because it was only published by them, but Team Bondi's L.A. Noire. Not only genre-defining game, but like graphically defining game. We talk about how impressive the graphics were, but that was the first time face capture, like they looked like the actors. I would see actors for years after playing that game and going, oh shit, they were in L.A. Noire. One of my favorite crime stories. People don't like the ending. I think it's a cool ending, but like it was just mind-blowing to me that we had such a fantastic piece of tech. Also, hated the driving in that game, but also it's because I hated the driving in any of the Grand Theft Auto games. Unless you were wrecking shop, it was never fun. And this game made you like drive within the lines and stop at traffic lights all the time, which drove me nuts. But it was such a cool crime drama. And it was like, again, at the forefront of gaming at the time. A game that now I think exists on Steam, maybe, but like is not clearly treated as well. And then a game I have to talk about because it defined multiplayer gaming for me on the AAA side is another Valve game that wasn't in the orange box, but Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2. I could, like, again, I wish I had my original profile so I could tell you the embarrassing amount of hours that I put into those two games. A co-op online zombie shooter where you had to race to save points and you could play with all your friends. Like, I spent so many late nights playing, especially Left 4 Dead 2, once they added some of the maps and characters from the first game into the second game. Like, it's all I played. And like, we've gotten games like it since, you know, Back 4 Blood was trying to stoke that fire and a few others, but I don't think anything hit in the same way that Left 4 Dead 2 did. And to this day, like, people clamor for a re-release or a new one, and we haven't gotten one. And I think it's this era of gaming that really kind of put, like, zombies were everywhere at this time too. Think about Dead Rising and Dead Rising 2, also huge hits at the time. I think this was the first gen where in-game stuff appeared in cutscenes. More games were using in-game engines. So, like, famously having the Servbot head on Frank during the cutscenes, it looked like a complete goof. Like, that also, I think, became really commonplace during a lot of these games. Like, being able to use the in-game engine and then being able to alter your character and look like a complete doofus in cutscenes. Those games, too, are some of my strongest memories because they just felt like the next evolution of video games, as cheesy as it is to say.
It definitely was a time of, I've actually been thinking about this the past few minutes of, in our Wii retrospective, I talked a little bit about how the Wii was kind of a dying of an old world and start of another in terms of a bunch of stuff. And I think just that whole console generation kind of is, because I'm thinking about that with the 360 in the jump to HD and sort of this jump into the truly cinematic games. Where, yeah, you are using your in-game engines to do your cutscenes, and you aren't just pre-rendering them. Metal Gear Solid on the PS1 used the in-game engine for all of its cinematics so that there was no disconnect in the gameplay and the cutscenes, so you felt like you were going the whole way through. This is when everybody started doing it, and for the better. Because, yeah, you could have those goofy moments in Dead Rising where, I mean, I feel like that was half the selling point. Like, what's the dumbest thing we can do in this ridiculous game? And I loved it for it. As well as everything like Mass Effect and Gears of War and Halo and any of these ones where, yeah, oh, it's a dumb bro-y story, but it's a story and you are watching the cinema of it. It's the beginning of a lot of that. And yeah, it was also the death knell for a lot of peripheral stuff. And much the same thing as I was just saying with cutscenes as in-game engine. Other console generations, other franchises did a lot of this stuff beforehand, but I feel like the 360 made it part of the assumed, part of what it came with, part of day one. And so everybody from top to bottom felt like they could go that far. And you could have more living, breathing worlds. Where you had living, breathing worlds in previous console generations, the games were more limited. You had great graphics, but you could only fit so much stuff onto the game, whatever else. Whether it was spacing, whether it was technology, whatever it was, you could explore a lot more.
Yeah. If you ever want to feel the length of the console cycle, just look up a list of every 360 game that came out and look at the sports titles in the M to Z part of the list. There were 12 Madden games.
Those are always outliers. They were making soccer games for the PS2 until about 10 years ago.
Yeah. But like even still, it's just like every year, so many games. You know, we saw the return of Rayman on this console. You know, we got Rayman Legends, Rayman Origins on it. Don't Nod, one of the first Don't Nod games I ever heard of because I missed Life is Strange was Remember Me, which I to this day still haven't played. But like I remember the trailers for Remember Me. Resident Evil had a big foothold on this console for the first time, really. Also, like the multiplayer games I think took hold here, but what I forgot was the era of Marvel Ultimate Alliance, like the evolution from the X-Men Legend games was on this console. Marvel Ultimate Alliance 1 and 2 were both huge hits on this console and how I played them. And again, it's because local multiplayer was just as big as online multiplayer and you could play 4 people on one console still at this time. I think this is really the last era of couch co-op supported in the same way. Like I play Borderlands 1 to completion, not online, but split screen with a friend on my couch.
Yeah, I've never single player played a Borderlands game.
Me neither.
It's always couch co-op. It's so
I've
good.
Tried. It's not fun. They're meant to be multiplayer. Yeah, they're meant to be multiplayer games, but it's wild to me just how huge this library is and the diversity of this library. And we have that now too, but I think this was kind of really the era of video games exploding in that way and like cross-platform really being cross-platform in a lot of ways for a lot of developers. It's just still to this day kind of astonishing to me the amount of games and the kinds of games we got. Now, the quality, like we said also in the PS2 retrospective, never higher, but also never lower. And, you know, I've played some of the worst games I've ever played on the Xbox 360. And that includes, like I mentioned earlier, the Thor game, which was based on the first Thor movie, was like, what if God of War or Devil May Cry, but really bad and not a lot of like variety. That was the Thor game, you know, but there were a lot of those too, because I guess it was easier. It was cheaper. I don't even know, but there was a lot of that.
You know, you kind of unlocked a memory of mine. There were a couple of franchises on PlayStation that Xbox tried to copy.
Yeah.
And the two that immediately come to mind were Dante's Inferno,
Yep.
which was a God of War clone, and Prototype,
Yes.
which was an Infamous
That's
competitor.
right.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't have a PS3, and I remember wanting to play Infamous so badly.
Yep.
And then I read like Prototype is kind of like that. So, okay, I'll go try that. And I loved the Prototype games.
Yeah.
But this is not something that happens anymore. They're not really trying to copy what the other is doing specifically. Like Xbox isn't making a God of War clone or something like that. But back then, they very much were like, oh, the Wii is really popular. Okay, well, we're going to try and copy what the Wii is doing. A God of War is selling like crazy. Well, we're going to make our own version of that with a different, epic poem or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's a bygone era of video games. The console wars rage on, but they're not doing it like they used to. The console wars live with the people on Twitter now, more so than the people actually making games.
Yeah. I'd be remiss if before we started to wrap up, I didn't mention obviously the biggest game on all of Xbox 360, which was of course the game that came with almost every console once you signed up for Xbox Live, Uno.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Minecraft.
I mean, Minecraft came later, but Uno,
yeah.
Like you could play Uno online. It seems so silly, but it was pretty fun. And it came with the console. Also, like tons of those like puzzle games, like we mentioned Geometry Wars before, Bejeweled. Mm-hmm. This was like the era of those online puzzle games in a way that like Izuma, also huge on Xbox Live Arcade, that now, I mean, they're still around, mobile mostly, but in a few other places. But like the famous gif of the guy yelling Bejeweled 2 and jumping and the giant 2 on
Peggle
the screen.
2.
Oh, was that for Peggle 2? I thought
it was Peggle 2.
It was Peggle 2, the sequel to Peggle.
Yes. And it is very funny that the original Xbox was the one that used off-the-shelf PC parts, and the Xbox 360 being the one that was a little more standard console style of custom parts. But the 360 was really the one that genuinely bridged PC gaming and console gaming in a way that hadn't been done before. And it's honestly in stuff like that you see it. But it's for good or for ill, the Xbox 360 was responsible for a lot.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I do want to do what we always do, pick a favorite game. And I alluded to this earlier, but I have to say my favorite game on this console, because I'm also just such a fan of the character, was Wolverine Origins. So I was always been a Wolverine fan, love Hugh Jackman's version of Wolverine. Wolverine Origins as a movie was a travesty, but Raven Software, who've done tons of other games since, this was one of the first games I remember them for making. And the thing that this game touted, because the Xbox 360 was so powerful, is that Wolverine would heal in real time. When you would get hit by a shotgun blast or a grenade, everything but his bone would come off, and you could watch his body heal in real time. And it was horrific in the best way. It was, a God of War, Devil May Cry kind of game, but one of the better ones, but also easily the best Wolverine game I'd ever played, because you felt almost unkillable. You could still die, but between healing, your healing factor and regeneration, and like it covers this narrative of Wolverine's beginnings so much better than this shitty movie did. I love this game so much. And we got a lot of Wolverine games back in the day. Adamantium Rage, which was a big Super Nintendo and Genesis game that I loved. X-Men 3 based game that actually had Mark Hamill doing the voice in the video game on PS2, which is one of the wildest things. But this game, it just played unlike any other Wolverine game I'd ever played. And again, that healing in real time, like you took a shotgun blast to your face, you saw the metal skull and saw the hair and everything go back. It was just, look up clips of it. It's the dumbest, most ridiculous thing, but like it stays with me. And the fact that because it was a licensed title, because it's Raven Software, who've like moved around a bunch since, it's not available anywhere except on the 360. I think it is, I have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it is backwards compatible with the modern consoles if you have the old game. But am I going to buy an Xbox console just for this game? Maybe at some point, but like, it's just wild to me that we got a game like that, and then we have not gotten a Wolverine game since, until of course the upcoming Insomniac game comes out that I'm sure is also going to be incredible. But like, till to this day, I think about that game at least once a day and like wish I could play it somewhere legally, because I would never download a ROM to play a game. That's illegal. You're not supposed to do that. Download ROMs, it's okay. But it's just one of those things where I would love to have an original version of this game because it just means so much to me.
Yeah. That's a small part that I think will disappear over time. But as we're recording this, like you said, a lot of games are just stuck on the 360.
Yeah.
Maybe if you have a current Xbox, you can do backwards compatibility, but like, I don't know. I don't have it, so I can't say for sure. But Xbox 360 is notoriously hard to emulate right now. Like, the best one that's out there is very much unfinished. People are working on it. Like, it's not their job or something. So people are working on it, but it is not a reliable way to play the games. Unlike, say a PS2 game that's locked on the PS2. Well, you can play any PS2 game you want on an emulator.
Right.
Xbox 360 is not like that. PS3 is much better than the 360. So that's a part of it too, is when we're talking about legacy of some of these games that are stuck there, some of them well and truly are stuck on the 360.
Yeah. Dave, if you had to pick a favorite game from this 2,155 game library, could you pick one game?
It's tough. I'm going to cheat.
Okay.
There's nothing you can do about
Nope.
it. So my favorite is Dark Souls. My favorite game from the system is Dark Souls. But the one that means the most to me when I think about my memories of the Xbox 360 is Oblivion. And that's the one I put the most time into. That's the one I was the most excited about. It's the reason I bought the console in the first place, and it lived up to every expectation I could have had back in 2006. So Oblivion is the answer from my heart. Dark Souls is like my favorite, you
right.
know?
Makes sense.
That totally makes sense. Yeah.
I think for me, I played Final Fantasy 13 on the Xbox 360. That was an incredible experience. BioShock was a game that I remember like waking up early before going to work and putting in like 45 minutes to an hour into BioShock like every morning for a while there, like having that level of everything to it. And that might be my pick, because there's also plenty of games that are Xbox 360 games that I associate with other platforms. But one that I definitely want to shout out, and a little bit of a joke answer, a little bit of an actual favorite, a little bit of whatever. Like, let's just say BioShock's my one. BioShock 1 is my official answer. But I got to shout out, I made a game with zombies in it.
Oh, yes. How could I forget? One of the best Xbox Live games ever made.
Which I think is one of the reasons why it is such a testament to the environment that it came out. It was an early Ska Studios title, James Silva, responsible for Salt and Sanctuary. But this was a $1 zombie top-down light graphics shoot 'em up.
That was Vampire Survivors before Vampire Survivors was Vampire Survivors.
Absolutely, it was.
Yeah.
And and look, Vampire Survivors could never have a bop like I made a game with zombies in it, which was the song that played while you played I made a game with zombies in it, telling you about the game I made a game with zombies in it, how you should play said game, how it's only $1. Come on, I made a game with zombies in it. And you know what? I'm all for committing to a bit. And you know what? $1 for a bit like that, that's actually a lot of fun to play, is perfect.
Yeah.
So I'd say BioShock, and I made a game with zombies in it.
Those are good answers. I mean, it's funny. I played the original BioShock on the Xbox, but I never finished it there. I didn't finish it till many years later on PC. Infinite was the one that I played on 360 and finished on 360. Is definitely not my favorite in that franchise, but we're not even going to get into that. I'm not even touching it with a 10-foot pole at this point. But it's one of those things that, like, at the time, for sure, at least, the BioShock franchise was, again, one of those impressive franchises that now, like, we got the System Shock remake, which I haven't played. Supposedly, Ken Levine came out of his hole to start working on another game that we're getting. Judas, I think it's called.
Judas.
Yeah, Judas. And so we'll see. But, like, it definitely influenced those kinds of games. I mean, Dave and I never shut up about Prey, a game that definitely wouldn't have existed without BioShock, I don't think, and immersive sims in general. But yeah, I think that we could probably do another hour and a half on the 360 easily, and might be something that we have to return to, just because the consoles get bigger as we start doing more of the modern consoles. It's very easy to sum up the SNES or the NES or the Game Boy or whatever in an hour, I think. But like these larger consoles with larger cycles and larger libraries, it's just hard hard to wrap up. But Dave, thank you for attempting to do that with us. We are so glad to have you. I'm not kidding. When we first started talking about the console, Dave's like, I'm in for the 360, whatever it takes. And
yeah, whenever it happens.
And Dave's not exaggerating. Dave and I talk almost every day, and at least once a week we mention, oh, by the way, if you're going to do this, like me and Dave are recording something 2 days from now because I said, hey, you should do an episode on this. And you're like, all right, you want to do it with me? Like, it's literally how those conversations go. So Dave, thank you for continuing to be an incredible collaborator. As of when this is released, we've already hung out in person at PAX East, which was so dope.
Oh, yeah.
So good.
So good. But tell folks where they can find you online and the cool stuff that you've been making.
First of all, thank you both for having me back on. It's always a pleasure talking with both of you, whether it's on my show or yours, or whether I'm doing yet another side quest episode. I got another one in the pipeline.
Yeah, let's
go. I got like 7 more ideas after that
Good.
one. So, yeah, thank you both for having me back on. For those who don't know me, I'm from the Tales from the Backlog podcast, where I'm the only permanent host. Every episode of that is me with a different guest, where we talk about a different game, usually something in backlog territory, or by the time an episode about a brand new game actually makes it to my feed, it's in backlog territory for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Every episode we dive as deep as we can with no spoilers for a while. Then there's a hard spoiler break. After that, we do like the deep story discussion and stuff. We do not cut it short for the sake of time.
No.
We'll talk about the game as long as it takes. And if you want evidence, you can go check out the episode that Matt, Geoff, and Case Aiken did about the 3 versions of Metroid 2, which is a 3-hour plus episode.
That's correct.
Where no detail was spared. And that one has 3 spoiler walls in it.
It does. Yeah. For each game.
Yeah. So I'm committed to that. I want people to be able to listen to that show, whether or not they've played the game, and get that kind of deep dive type of content from it. So that's Tales from the Backlog. I also have another show called A Top 3 Podcast, which is a top 3 list and draft type show. It's a lot simpler. So you can just go look at A Top 3 Podcast and find the topic that sounds most interesting to you, and that's more of a comedy show. And Matt has been on that show as well.
I have.
And I forget, was that video game weapons?
Yep, it was the top 3 video game weapons, where we had to explain to, I believe, either Aaron, it might have been Aaron, why the shovel is a weapon and why I kept calling it a shovel blade instead of just a shovel, because they're different. Damn it. If you played Shovel Knight, you would know. Anyway.
Yeah. You try bouncing on heads with the shovel that you have in your garage. It's not going to work. It has to be a shovel blade.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. So those are my 2 shows. Like Matt, I have too many podcasts, but those are my 2. And again, thank you both for having me back on.
It's great to have you. And we're going to do our whole spiel, but while we're doing that, please go rate and review both of Dave's podcasts, because it helps and because I'm sure you'll like them. Also, Dave has a Patreon like we do. I'm a member of it. It's totally worth it. I get to dictate some of the games that he plays, for better or worse, and it's been a lot of fun to do that.
It is fun, yeah.
But there are a bunch of cool levels. And also go to Dave's Discord. Geoff and I are both there. Lots of great conversations.
Absolutely.
Today, I think just today, we were talking about how people actually like Sonic Frontiers, which was an okay game. I don't know what the big shock is anyway. But thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure, Dave. Listeners, if you have favorite Xbox 360 games, hit us with them. There are so many, and I know there are definitely ones that neither of us have played. We didn't even talk about all the different like virtual pinball machines that were on the Xbox 360, and there were a lot.
Because I have things to do today.
Right, exactly.
Now, we didn't talk about Dragon's Dogma today, which is a 360 game.
We didn't,
and
although
Dragon's Dogma 2 is coming soon.
Yeah, it's imminent. I mean, I played it on the Switch for the first time, which was a great way to play it, but that's why it's not an Xbox game to me. I didn't mention Alan Wake either, which I won't shut up about because I played it on PC. But
we didn't talk about Dishonored.
Nope. Dave mentioned it briefly, but we didn't even dive that deep. There's so many games. But yeah, let us know what your favorite games. Did you have a 360? What you love about it? Did you use Xbox Live? Did you play a lot of indie games? What's the first indie game you ever played? Any of that stuff, because we love to hear from you guys and we can't cover it all.
Please let us know your highs and lows of the Xbox 360. Yeah, do you still have it? Do you still have any of the controllers? Do you PC game with your Xbox 360 controller? What are some of the great memories that you have sharing couch co-op and online gameplay? Any and all of these is part of this retrospective, because it doesn't stop with this episode. It continues with all of you. Please let us know. Get in touch with us. There's so many great ways to reach out. We are on all social media that we're on as Fun and Games Pod, Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, Tumblr. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, and who you'd like us to talk with on future episodes. You can get an up-to-date feed on everything we're doing on our Patreon, patreon.com/funandgamespod. You don't have to pledge any money to be a part of the Patreon. We do have a free tier, but we appreciate to the ends and beyond everybody who has had the means and desire to support us financially. It's helped us out a lot this past year or so, and we especially want to shout out those up on the high scoreboard. And today, the high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Needon, Luke Lewis, Roger Reichardt, Alejandro Alves, Curly Bright, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Rob Tremarco, Robert Prine, Sean Bowen, and Wes Bates. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials and your gamer score. Please don't lie about it. We're not going to judge you for it. Well, we're not going to grade you for it. We are going to judge you for it, but that's
Correct.
Just gaming. But thank you.
Thank you.
You can visit certainpov.com and find not only other fantastic Certain POV podcasts, but a permanent invite link to our Discord server where a lot of these conversations continue.
Yep, Dave's over there hanging out with us, often letting us know the games you've been playing, whether it's complimentary or not, depending on what he's covering for the show. And of course, Dave is a member of our Patreon, and we appreciate that. So thank you for that, Dave.
Love to be a part of it.
Here.
Also, I will say that by the time you're hearing this episode, likely we will have our next pull up for our next console retrospective. Might be a few months till we get to recording that episode, but we like to keep those rolling. I have some pretty chaotic picks in mind for mine, I think. So we'll
good.
See.
I've got some chaos. Let's talk let's talk after recording.
That's great. The easiest way to join the Discord server and to rate and review the podcast is in the show notes down below. We have links to Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as a direct link to the Discord to join in the conversation and hang out there. We appreciate y'all joining us. Dave, thank you again. And business is done. I guess we got out of here before we red ringed. I like that.
If it was going to happen, it was going to happen in the first half of things. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're hearing this. And if you are hearing this, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here, whether it's on the Patreon, whether it's on the Discord, or just listening. Thank you so much. We couldn't do this without you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey, Nerf herders.
You sure you want to go with that?
Hey, everyone.
There we go. More inviting.
Have you ever had a movie that you really wanted to love, but something holds you back?
Or one that you did love in spite of a flaw?
Well, I'm Case Aiken.
And I'm Sam Alisea.
And on Another Pass, we sit down with cool guests to look at movies that we find fascinating.
But flawed.
And we try to imagine what could have been done when they were made to give them that little push.
We're not experts. We just believe in criticism.
Constructive criticism.
Sure.
So come take another pass at some movies with us.
And every now and then, we can celebrate movies that did it on their own, too.
You can find us at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pass it on.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.